Welcome back to another edition of the Night Report podcast. I'm your host, Mike Broadbent. Joining me for this special bowl preview edition for the Rate Bowl between the Scarlet Knights and the Kansas State Wildcats is Scott McFarland. He is the host of Boscoe's Boys podcast. It is the highest rated Kansas State podcast on the market. So Scott, thanks so much for joining us and chopping it up for this game.
Definitely. Thank you, Mike, for having me on. And I want to wish all of your listeners, a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays. I think it's the best time of the year, and it has to do with the holidays. But I love bowl games, as we were talking about. So I'm pumped to talk to you guys. And quite frankly, I'm hoping K-State gets a little revenge for Josh Freeman in the inaugural Texas Bowl, where Ray Rice ran all over us. So, I'm hoping for a little revenge in that one. But I'm pumped to be on, and I'm pumped to be talking K-State versus Rutgers.
So we'll get into everything about the matchup and more, but first we have to pay some housekeeping bills. This podcast is presented to you by Night and Day Apparel. Hey, Rutgers fans, get ready to slam dunk your style with Night and Day Apparel. Cheer on your Scarlet Knights this basketball season in our exclusive Rutgers gear, including this is a new shirt in their catalog, and it's one of my personal favorites. From trend-setting designs to lifestyle garments, we've got you covered with everything you need to support your team in comfort and flair. Stand out in the crowd and show your passion for Rutgers basketball with designs that celebrate every dribble, dunk, and victory. Use our promo code RutgersRivals to get 10% off your purchase. Don't wait. Head to Night and Day Apparel today and gear up for game day. Go Knights. We're also presented to you by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to live in-game betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds from everything to football, the NBA, college basketball, NHL, and UFC. Head to BetOnline today and don't forget to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to get your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, so we actually have pretty similar programs in terms of approach. Both our programs are run by old school style coaches. They're both self-described developmental programs. Chris Klieman is in year 6 of his Kansas State coaching. Just talk about how fans feel about him in year 6 and how the 2024 season went generally for the Wildcats.
Yeah, generally they fell short of expectations preseason, and I believe the preseason betting line on the win total over under was 9 or 9.5, so fell short of that as well. The schedule ended up being a lot more difficult than we thought coming into the season. All the preseason metrics go out the window once games start getting played. But it was looking like, oh, man, it's the red carpet is rolled out to go to Arlington. So when you get smoked by BYU on the road, that was a sobering game, no pun intended for our Mormon friends up in Utah. But then you get things rolling again, only to lose to a Houston team, which, quite frankly, it's one of the worst losses in K-State football history. They are a team that, depending on which, metric you want to use, one of the worst Power-Four teams in all of college football. And you had a 2-possession lead in the fourth quarter. And when that happened, I remember there was a very large meltdown from K-State fans. And I went to bat very hard saying, hey, look, this team is still set up that they could have a 10-win season, could have 3 straight top 20 seasons. We could still get to Arlington, all this type of stuff. And all that went out the window when you then lose coming off of a bye week versus Arizona State. And again, at that moment, some of my listeners sure let me have it. Quite frankly, we'll be 100% honest, which is completely fair. I was not anticipating losing that one, and then a very frustrating loss to end the season at Iowa State in a game that they tried their hardest to give away, and we could not capitalize on it. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. K-State's one of, I believe, it's either 6 or 8, I can't remember, but one of either 6 or 8, I think it's 8 programs that have had at least 8 wins every single year from 2021 through 2024. That's nothing to, stick your nose up at. That's a level of consistent winning that I think K-State and Chris Klieman should be proud of. Outside of the COVID year, he's never had a year where, he hasn't won at least 8 games with K-State. And I don't think the COVID year matters. I don't remember what Rutgers did in 2020, but if it was good, okay, it can count for you. But if it was bad, don't worry. 2020 does not count in my book at all. So It's a two-sided, coin. On one hand, you're so pleased, and he has that Big 12 championship, and he's had some great wins. But at the same time, he has a little bit of a reputation of losing some games you shouldn't, and that's frustrating another side of the fan base. So I kind of am straddling the line of saying, hey, he's awesome, he's great, but there's just a handful of frustrating, head-scratching losses, and it seems to happen just a little bit more than it should. So all in all, I don't know any K-State fan who wants to get rid of Chris Klieman. There's no one who's campaigning to fire him. Things look a little bleak every time they lose, but that's just college football fandom. But next year is a big one for him. If we go 8-4 again next year, again, he's not getting fired for going 8-4. We're not going to turn into Nebraska firing Frank Solich or anything. But it will feel like it was a letdown of these last 3 seasons not getting a second appearance down in Arlington for the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, or Bo Pelini for that matter. How many 9-win seasons in a row did he have before they cast him off? And it's been a 10-year odyssey to get back to that point.
The difference is Bo Pelini was a dick. I don't know what level of swearing is
no, you're allowed to
acceptable.
just fire it out. Say what you want.
But Bo Pelini was a dick. Chris Kleiman's a super nice guy, and there's an element of the K-State fan base who almost think he's too nice, and he's not like win at all cost. Ignore your family. 11 months out of the year, like
sleep under the desk of the office.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a element of fans that kind of yearn for that style of Bill Snyder. Bill Snyder needed to go. I'm glad he was fired. But that's who he was. He ignored his family almost his entire life as a coach. He slept at the office. He would eat Taco Bell once a day, and that's all he ate. So I think there is an element that wants that from Chris Klieman. That's just not who he is.
So Rutgers and Kansas State kind of had a diametrically opposed season because Rutgers had its meltdown in October. We started 4-0. We went 0-4 in October, and then we closed strong in November with a 3-1 record. You guys started 7-1, like you said, controlled your own destiny to get to Arlington, and you fall apart in November. What would you place the primary blame for your November woes this season?
As much as I hate to say it because he's come on the show and I love him as a person, but Conor Riley is the offensive coordinator. Through the first 8 games, depending, again, I love looking at different advanced metrics, but if you want to look at points per drive, scoring rate, yardage rate, all this sort of stuff, it was the number 1 offense in the Big 12. It was one of the best offenses in the country when you look at some of those advanced metrics. Then it completely fell off. We were so high up in like comparing stuff to fellow Big 12 schools that there was a monumental collapse where now they're middle of the pack in all of this stuff. So to have that sort of drop off is massive. Now, how much of that is play calling? How much of that is the wear and tear of a football season? How much of that is not executing plays? I don't know, but he's been the scapegoat. And as much as I tried to defend him through a handful of those, it was tough to do so towards the end. And really, like I said, no one's trying to fire Chris Klieman in the fan base. There are a lot of fans that want to pull the ripcord on Conor Riley after just 1 year as the offensive coordinator. And it's tough to, defend against those folks who want to do that. So that's a big thing. And then also the defense, for as good as they are at times, could not force a turnover to save their lives. Interceptions hit them in the hands, tipped balls just flutter in the middle of the field with nowhere to be, bad pitches, ball on the ground. They are not recovering it. So they will put, our opponents in turnover worthy plays, but they're not converting on them. K-State had, I believe it was 3 turnover worthy plays versus Iowa State, turned over two times. Iowa State graded out at 9 turnover worthy plays in that finale, 0 turnovers.
Wow.
So that tells you how bad it is. And, look, you can't be that bad and blame it all on turnover luck. Some of it is there is an element of luck with turnovers, but when your opponent tries to give you the ball 9 times and you can't do it once, that is something that is wrong with the defense.
Totally fair. Before we get into specific units, I just wanted to table set to kind of get an idea of who actually will be playing for Kansas State, because, in the era of the transfer portal and the playoffs, like, bowl games have been almost totally de-emphasized outside of, with the TV partners with these conferences. Who are some impact players you expect to not be suiting up for the Wildcats, whether that be due to entering the portal, entering the draft, or because of injuries?
Yeah, so there's 4 starters and 1 reserve who is playing a lot down the stretch that will not be there. Transfer portal, Keegan Johnson was one of our starting wide receivers. I believe statistically he was our number 2 wide receiver. A reserve wide receiver who was getting a lot more snaps down the stretch, Trey Spivey. He will not be playing. Then our starting, he's in the portal. And then our starting right tackle, Carver Willis, he already committed to Washington. So, and that was really the only big surprise in the portal. Starting running back, and I struggle with this, but probably my favorite K-State football player post-college for me, because, everything hits different when you're, peers with these guys.
Sure. But
DJ Giddens out of Junction City, our all-time, or number 3 all-time rusher. Number 1, his season right now was the best yards per carry average in the history of K-State football, a history that includes Deuce Vaughn, Darren Sproles, Daniel Thomas, all sorts of NFL running backs. He was better than all of them in yards per touch. He's going to be he's going through the draft process. He will not be playing. And then Jacob Parrish, a cornerback out of I believe there's Olathe, Kansas, here in the Kansas City Metro. He is also going to the NFL draft early, and he will not be playing. That is all I expect. A backup quarterback who had like 12 snaps. Granted, 3 of them were very important versus Colorado, but he's in the portal, but that's not a big deal. And then some depth guys, but nothing overly impactful outside of those 5-6 guys already listed.
Gotcha. Outside of like the best player on the team, you're
no
really
big
affected.
deal. Outside of the best player on offense and the best player on defense and no big deal. but I guess the reason why I say that, and I know you didn't ask, but a lot of K-State fans are really longing for Dylan Edwards to get more touches, and there's a lot of excitement for Joe Jackson, who's going to get, my guess is, the bulk of the carries in the running back room. So again, while you are losing one of probably the guy I think is going to go down as the most underrated K-State Wildcat of all time in DJ Giddens, there is a lot of excitement in that running back room. So I think that's probably why, despite not having him, there is a little bit of giddiness in the air when talking about running backs in Manhattan, Kansas.
So that seems to be a common theme with Kansas State fans, because last year you had 4-year starter Will Howard, who I wouldn't say he got run off by the fan base, but I don't think many people were really pining for him to return. Because you had Avery Johnson behind him, I think there was a lot of excitement about the changes that he could bring as the quarterback to the offense. Why was that? And would you say that Avery Johnson lived up to the hype that your fan base kind of had behind the scenes for him this season?
So I think the excitement is, he's a Kansas kid. We beat out almost every single program, for him. You had to fend off a bunch of programs that wanted him to hop into the portal. So it's a big recruiting win. He had an electric ability with his legs. He sustained an injury versus Colorado, which kind of neutered his running game a little bit more than we would have liked. But he is exponentially more talented than Will Howard. If you're just putting those 2 quarterbacks into a factory, there is nothing from Will Howard outside of his experience that you would take over Avery Johnson. There is nothing that Will Howard does that is better than Avery Johnson. If you look at what Will Howard did passing and running and compared it to Avery Johnson had more combined yards. Avery Johnson had more combined touchdowns. He had a lower completion percentage, but he didn't, have Ohio State's weapons where he could toss the ball 3 yards and it goes for an 80-yard touchdown. Will Howard had the lowest yards per attempt, air yards per attempt in Power-Four football, and he put up those numbers. Again, Will Howard was a big part of our Big 12 championship, but Will Howard had never been the most talented quarterback at K-State. There wasn't a single year on the roster where he was the most talented guy. So I think K-State fans saw that, and I come from a camp that is a little bit more salty towards Will Howard based on some of the stuff he's said since he left. There's still a very large portion that loves Will Howard. I don't think anyone would have preferred to keep him over Avery Johnson. There's a lot of folks who were full on cheering for him and want him to win a national championship. I'm not necessarily cheering against him, but I laughed when I saw the game he had versus Michigan based on some of the stuff he'd said over these years. I'm not going to be putting on Scarlet and Gray as he's playing in the playoff. But I don't wish ill upon him. I'm just not cheering for him. But, and to live up to the hype, no, because K-State fans, like we were like, okay, he's going to be the next face of college football. He's going to be first team all Big 12. He's going to be an All-American contender. He's going to be a Heisman contender. We saw flashes of that. But again, first year as a true starter, he's a true sophomore. He did not live up to that level of expectation. But again, when I laid out, if you want to compare things back and forth between him and Will Howard, I think he held his own. So sorry, I went on way more of a diatribe than you wanted me to.
This is why you're here, to give us all the information that we're all kind of wondering. He is a true dual threat this year. He passed for over 2,500 yards, 22 touchdowns through the air, 9 interceptions, just under 60% completion, 59.1. Added another 548 yards rushing on the ground and 6 touchdowns. He had a 100-yard game against a ranked Arizona early in the season. Rutgers has struggled against mobile quarterbacks, and they've made statuesque quarterbacks look, like Michael Vick at times this year. Ethan Garbers immediately comes to mind, who set his career high in rushing in a single game. Max Brosmer, the quarterback from Minnesota, set a season high or a career high in rushing this against Rutgers as well. So against true dual threats, we all kind of are always shaking in our seats a bit, I guess, because there's just a long history of Greg Schiano not being able to account for the quarterback in the run game. But speaking of the run game, you've already covered that DJ Giddens will not be playing in this game. One of my main questions was going to be, who do you expect to replace him? You already mentioned that. What is it about Dylan Edwards, though, that has the fan base so excited, and who could be possibly the back behind Dylan Edwards that also gets time in this game?
Yeah, so the fan base loves Dylan Edwards. Again, it's another Kansas kid. We love having these stars from Kansas, and again, he was a major blue chip recruit. We originally won his recruitment. He verbaled to K-State, then he decommitted Notre Dame, then decommitted Colorado, and then he came home. Childhood friends with Avery Johnson, so it was this storybook type of thing that you write out in a Hollywood script. And a lot of K-State fans, he has elite speed for a running back, but I think something where I think some K-State fans miss is this isn't NCAA football 25. You can't just line up a guy with a 99 speed and score a touchdown every play. I think he lacks a little bit of change of direction, and I think he's a little bit shoehorned for my opinion, but I'm just a dude of the podcast. I'm not a coach or anything. But I think he's more of a gadget guy than a true every down back. And Joe Jackson is that other guy that I mentioned. He's out of Florida, and he's shown some good sparks in his time at K-State. I actually, if you made me place a bet, which I would do with your great sponsor, that next year he is our leading rusher, not Dylan Edwards. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. I think that the bowl game is going to give a very interesting look into how they may operate in life after DJ and the touch, who has more touches, what sort of touches those two get. That's going to be at the top of my list of things I'm watching for as a K-State fan in the game.
I'm intrigued by that too, because if you just look at just the raw volume, I think DJ Giddens had like 70 to 80% of the running back touches for your team this year. And, we had a similar situation with Kyle Monungai, and we're not sure if he's going to play or not. So to give you a little color behind the scenes here, but just trying to figure out how you guys are going to decide to formulate an offense without him, given that you guys had a 6.1% run rate over expected this year. So you're just running the ball way more often than would be expected. That could be partially because Avery Johnson's just taking off. Would you say you have more of a designed run scheme for Avery Johnson, or is he a scramble, take what's given to you kind of quarterback?
So we don't do as much design run as I'd want to. I think they have made a very real effort to limit how many hits he takes, especially after that Colorado game. I mean, there have been a handful of games where there have been 0 designed runs for Avery Johnson. So I think that in this bowl game, because versus NC State last year in the bowl game that he started, there was maybe 2 designed runs for him and then a handful of scrambles. I think you'll see him scramble to pick up some first downs on second and third down, but I think he will throw the ball away on first down, even if there might be 2 or 3 yards, just not to get a hit. He will step out of bounds on some of those unless it's a third down. I would be surprised if we saw a bunch of designed run for the bowl game, which is too bad because I think that his legs are the biggest weapon K-State has on offense. But they are going above and beyond, in my opinion, in trying to protect him and limit the hits he takes.
Moving on to pass catchers, Jace Brown led the team with 763 receiving yards. He'll be playing in the game, but as we mentioned, you'll be out without number 2 receiver Keegan Johnson. Number 3 receiver is DJ Giddens. Trey Spivey is a guy you said played a lot down the stretch. He had 100-some yards this season as well. Who's going to be some of the ancillary pass catchers to keep an eye out for in this game?
I think they'll want to get Dylan Edwards involved in the passing game. I think all 3 tight ends could get involved, or hell, all four tight ends. I think we had 4 tight ends with multiple touchdowns this year. Garrett Oakley ended up with second team all conference honors. The tight ends will really be where they look to in the red zone, not as much in between the 20s. I think the hope amongst K-State fans is maybe you see a guy like Jacques Spradley Demps, who's on the 2 deep for the first time all year. See him get some run out there. Jaden Jackson has had some big moments as a Wildcat. He's listed as a starter on the depth chart. Ty Bowman, a walk-on to wide receiver Story out of Chanute, Kansas. He's on the depth chart. Sterling Lockett, the younger brother of Tyler Lockett, of the Lockett family at K-State. He's on the 2 deep. I would be shocked. I'll show up on one of your shows, live stream butt ass naked, if Sterling Lockett really makes a big impact in the game. But K-State fans are desperate to see another Lockett make some big moves. But I think it really is going to be Jace Brown. I think it's going to be the tight ends. I think it's going to be Dylan Edwards. I think you'll see 1 or 2 big plays from Jaden Jackson if we're having the sort of night I hope we do. But I really do think it's going to be Jace Brown if it's going to come from a wide receiver.
Interesting. On your podcast, your season review podcast, you mentioned the offense kind of wilting down the stretch due to a lot of injuries. Who's expected to return or be back into playing shape for the bowl game that was not necessarily in playing shape down the stretch?
Well, so the funny thing about it is, and maybe this was a mistake, a lot of these guys played through injuries, and there were very few games where guys didn't play. They just were a shell of themselves. Keegan Johnson, who's not on the team, he's the only one who really missed a bunch of time due to injury. You had earlier in the season, you had, the tight ends missing a game or 2 here, but I really think that the team might have been better off a couple of these guys missing a game, rotating around and trying to get fully healthy instead of playing through all of it. Every single one of the offensive linemen have had, broken, fingers and toes and high ankle sprains. Like you see them just hobbling off the field at the end of the game, and you're shocked when you get the tweet. Okay, looks like, we got all 5 of them starting again. So it'll be interesting to see how fresh they look with this much time off. So that's really been the thing. Every single one of, your pass catchers, Jace Brown has had games where he goes anonymous because he was dealing with a high ankle sprain. DJ Giddens down the stretch, he was, I'm not going to say anything because, hey, now it's draft time for him. I don't know if any scouts for the Kansas City Chiefs or Jets or Giants or anyone else might be listening to this. So I'm not going to disclose what he was dealing with. I'm sure it'll come out in his physicals, but the fact that he didn't miss a game is absurd. Avery Johnson, again, was dealing with a hip flexor after the Colorado game the entire season. So it was a lot of just football happens type of stuff, but I think a lot of these guys would have been better off maybe taking a week off, getting 100% healthy. So that's where I might be a little bit more excited as a K-State fan coming into this game after 3-4 weeks off to see what they look like.
Yeah, Rutgers is in a very similar situation. Greg Schiano has, lamented after the season that he's never seen in 35 years of coaching an injury situation like Rutgers has experienced this year, from before the start of the season, losing arguably our best defensive player, Mohamed Toure, to a torn ACL, to having, if there was an IR in college football, we would have probably had like a dozen people at a time at minimum on the IR throughout this season. So just devastating injuries. And I think we'll be a lot healthier for the bowl game. I know we kind of touched on the offensive coordinator, Conor Riley, a bit at the start. Another thing you said on your interview podcast was there's just a lot of fans lining up with pitchforks to kind of oust him. You kind of said he's hard to defend at this point. Just to kind of like really put a pin in it, why are so many fans upset with Conor Riley?
So I think it's twofold. I think almost every fan base, no matter the level of football, whether it's Pop Warner up to the NFL, I think fans always hate the offensive coordinator. Unless you're scoring a touchdown every play, people are going to gripe about the offensive coordinator. Under Colin Klein, we had back-to-back years where points per drive, we were in the top 15 in all of college football, and there would be people who would be pissed off at him, if they go 3 and out twice in a game, So I think that's part of it. The second part of it is he isn't Colin Klein. He was an internal hire of a guy that Chris Klieman has known his entire life. So a lot of folks were like, oh, this was just a lazy hire at offensive coordinator. And then again, when you are sitting at 7-1, technically at the time, not controlling your own destiny, but knowing that, hey, football is going to happen. If you win out, you're going to Arlington, only to have the offense, put up dud after dud in games that you lose. Fans feel vindicated in their original thoughts on the hire. They're like, all right, let's get rid of him. You don't want to waste a talent like Avery Johnson. So you need to get rid of him. Again, I'm at this point that I think if something was going to happen, it already would. So I think he'll be back as the play caller next year. But a lot of K-State fans aren't happy with that. And then the offensive performance down the stretch, it's that final 4 games, it's really tough to even 5 games. The game versus KU was not a great offensive night. It's tough to really have much more of a, I think he can do it. There's not much to really tangibly point to and say, no, this is why we should keep going if you're talking to someone who is dead set on wanting to get rid of him.
Yeah, another thing you kind of dropped anecdotally was your offense this year is setting a program record in both yards per play and rushing yards per play. So
which
it is
is
kind
nuts.
of like, yeah.
It is nuts, man, because eventually, we've had red zone problems and we've had drive sustainability issues. It's been a lot of big plays. We've had a fun offense with, big 30, 40-yard runs a few times a game and some deep bombs. But it is wild that when you're looking at some of these stats that it is one of the best offenses of all time. But when you can't get the points, when you can't, step up in some of these very meaningful games, it's tough. It is tough to look someone in the eye and say, hey, but look at all these yards. And they say, well, okay, what happened versus Houston? What happened versus Arizona State? What happened, versus Iowa State? In there. Yep, it's tough.
Last thing I have for you on the offense is we already talked about Carver Willis leaving, starting right tackle, left for Washington. You mentioned there's a lot of young linemen. The fan base is really excited to see. You mentioned that there was a lot of missed blocks that could have turned 5-yard gains into 50-yard gains. Talk about the offensive line and some of the changes we might see from the regular season to the bowl game.
So Andrew Linegang is going to start at right tackle, and he was one of the first recruiting wins that Chris Klieman had that I was pumped because at the time you beat Stanford, Northwestern, some of these schools that at the time had a great reputation of putting, offensive linemen into the NFL. and he hasn't been able to crack into the starting five. And he's going to step in there, and I'm pumped about that. And then you have Gus Hawkins, who's a true freshman, making an appearance on the 2 deep, and Jackson Fulmer, who's a redshirt freshman, making an appearance on the 2 deep. How much will those guys play? I don't know. But I'm really pumped. And Andrew Leingang is the number 1 player in the entire game that I'm going to be zeroed in on, probably on the rewatches. It's tough to really focus on the right tackle in the moment, like when it's like, okay, hey, 3rd and 2, we need this first down to win the game. I'm not going to be only dialed in on him, but throughout the offseason, I'll probably rewatch the game multiple times, only focus on him. That's how excited I am for him to play. And then again, they had a tough time getting up to the second level. And really, the tight ends and wide receivers struggled more than the offensive line when you want to talk about turning 5 10-yard plays into home run touchdowns. In games where we do have 4 or 5 of these 30, 40-yard runs, that's when the tight ends and wide receivers have been dialed in and getting blocks downfield. The offensive line had done a decent job most of the season attacking the front 7, not always doing a great job of getting up to that second level on double team and climb up the ladder. But they've been pretty solid, which isn't a ringing endorsement, but I have a lot more complaints than the offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at some of the numbers, like your rushing offense was 20th in the country at almost 200 yards per game. You only allowed 11 sacks on the year, which is 12th in the country. So just looking at the metrics, there's not a whole lot that screams out like problematic offensive line. But I mean, sometimes fan bases can be the biggest critics. So to hear some of those comments, I just wanted to hear a little bit more kind of background as to why some of those sentiments were there. Transitioning to the defensive side of the ball, you had some really high-level playmakers. We'll start at the defensive line. Brendan Mott was the lone first-team All-Big 12 selection for the Wildcats this year. He led the conference in sacks, and he also was named the Defensive Lineman of the Year. Just talk about what makes him such a disruptive player off the edge.
Has a great motor. Again, it's another one of those walk-on to scholarship stories that K-State has had. He doesn't have like a great pass rush set. Like, he's not a guy who has 7 moves in his bag, but he's good getting off the ball. He has a motor. And look, if he gets pushed up field and the defensive backfield's doing his job, he's great at coming back to it. And he just has a nose for the quarterback. He's been playing college football for a long time. He knows how to feel out a tackle. He knows where a quarterback likely may be stepping in or getting out of the pocket. So I think it's just his experience and motor, because I don't think, and I might be selling him short, but I don't think he's going to be an NFL guy. He might get on a preseason roster. He might be a practice squad guy, but he doesn't have the move set. He doesn't have the athletic ability that you'd see in Felix Anudike-Uzomah, who was a 2-time winner of that award. He doesn't have, the strength that Jordan Willis, another guy who'd won that award and been an NFL draft pick. So I think it really comes down to just him being that old school, he's from Iowa, just old school Midwest, corn-fed guy who doesn't know how to quit. It's like, I didn't hear no bell, and he doesn't give up on a play. And I think that's what makes him special because, and again, I hope he doesn't listen to this, but there's nothing intrinsically about him. There's nothing about his talent or moveset that you look at and you're just blown away. It's just that this guy doesn't know how to quit, and he has been playing football for so long. He knows exactly where to be and when.
Are there any other difference makers along the defensive line that you think should be highlighted for this game for Kansas State? Sorry.
So all the defensive ends, like, they've had like their moments, they've had their games, and that's what makes that group fun. This will be, Cody Stufflebean will be starting outside of him, and he's been playing for a long time. And again, it's just another guy. Like, our 2 starters, they're probably the least talented guys in the room, but they have the work rate and they have the experience. But you look down the roster, Toby Osunsami. He is the most talented guy. If you want to talk pure athletic ability and pure pass rushing talent, he is the guy. But this is his first year playing defensive end. He was a converted linebacker And he played safety in high school. So he went from playing safety in high school to linebacker his first couple of years at K-State to now a rush defensive end. So he's a guy to watch. Chidi Obiazor, another very talented, defensive end. Ryan Davis, another one. Again, we could throw 6-7 defensive ends out there, and if you told me that this guy got a sack or this guy got a sack, I wouldn't be surprised. It's just a matter of who had a good bowl prep, down distant situations, and you'll see those guys rotate a lot. And then Marquis Siegel, he's a guy at safety that should be a playmaker. Back-to-back years, he should have set the team record for interceptions. But I think he maybe grabbed 1 or 2 this year. He should have had 12. He could have had 3 just in the Iowa State game. So he has stone hands. So he'll break up a pass, but you don't have to worry about him, picking it off. But so he should be a playmaker, but sadly he's not. And then, all the linebackers are solid. Desmond Purnell, so he's from Topeka, my hometown, had an absolutely massive first 3 games. But again, he's had to play almost every snap, and it feels like he just kind of broke down towards the end of the year. So he might be another guy I'd look at with this extended period off to maybe make some big plays.
Player I'm surprised I didn't hear you mention, and maybe I did, and you just totally glossed over him, was Austin Romaine, the middle linebacker. Leads the team in tackles, highest graded linebacker in the Power-Four according to PFF. He's only a sophomore. What makes him such a special player?
Yeah, and that's shame on me because this is probably something about linebackers that they don't get enough credit for. They make the tackles. He might not get a bunch of tackles for loss, but he steps up into the hole and he prevents a 2-yard run from turning into a 12-yard run. He's a very heady player. And again, I think this is at risk of falling into a bunch of stereotypes, but he's very smart out there. He knows where he needs to be, and he's tough. He's tough as nails. Again, he's another guy who probably could have sat out a game or 2 this season just from, being banged up, but he's another guy where it's like, all right, he is going to be out there, and he's a guy who was a 2-star recruit, and I was like, all right, this guy is never going to play. And then sure enough, I think he was robbed off the PFF All-American team because I was tracking that all year, and I was like, all right, I can't wait to fire off this tweet. PFF All-American didn't happen. Second team All Big 12. But he's not a playmaker. He is just a football player who is going to make the correct play at the correct time. I'd be shocked if he got a sack, but he might force a fumble. I don't think he's going to pick off, any interceptions, but he might end up with 15, tackles at the end of the game. And, in group chats after the game, K-State fans will be like, man, did you see the stat line? He ended up with 15 tackles, 12 of them being solos. And you're like, no. And then you have to go look at the ESPN app. And sure enough, it's like, well, damn, he did it again. That's just the sort of season that he's had.
Yeah. Sometimes based on the defense design too, like your job for the linebacker is like, the holes open up so you could tackle the guy one-on-one. And it's not like you're necessarily making a big explosive play in the backfield. You're just doing your job, and not saying that's what he is, but I found that PFF grades are the most unreliable, in my opinion, at linebacker. This isn't to say anything negative about Romaine, but there's been times where
they're unreliable.
Rutgers have been like incredibly graded, and it's just like he had a terrible game. I saw him getting burned all day at linebacker. But
my take on Pro Football Focus grades are, if it's good for a player that you want it to be good for, awesome, that is great. If it's bad, no, they don't know what they're doing. So that's my take on Pro Football Focus. If they're nice to my guys, they're the best in the world. If they're mean to my guys, they don't know anything.
I think it's a good digestible metric. It is not by any means gospel, but I think it's more encompassing than any other general number to say this player played good, this player played bad, but it's far from perfect. In looking through some of your defensive tendencies, the Big 12 is obviously known for offensive firepower, but Kansas State seemed to succumb to big plays a lot this year. You guys were 126th in the nation in explosive plays allowed. What would you primarily attribute those big plays allowed to?
It's twofold. One, very aggressive just by nature. Since Chris Klieman has come, Joe Klanderman, we've stopped like one. No, that's a lie. We've stopped like 3 trick plays in the history of the Chris Klieman era. One of them was versus Oklahoma, and one, ironically enough, was back in 2019, and one, ironically enough, was versus Iowa State in our final game. But if you're doing a flea flicker, a double pass, a reverse, anything like that, you're going to pick up a big chunk. Same with play action. Again, we will bite on play action until the cows come home. It is insane, and it's because they play so aggressively. The second thing is very poor communication, especially amongst the safeties in zone coverage. They are probably the worst, and we have 3 safeties back there. It's probably the worst communication, the worst back end zone defense I've seen since I've tried to digest more than see ball, get ball, level of football fandom. So over the last 6-7 years where I've really tried to be more of a, truly digest what's going on, it is far and away the worst communication. Just disgusting. To the point where I got at different points in the season, I said, screw it. Just, put your 5 best man defenders out there and don't play zone at all. That's how bad the communication has been. So I think it's twofold of over aggression and just horrible communication that never got fixed over 12 games of football.
So if you're an offensive coordinator going up against this Kansas State defense, what are you doing to exploit the weaknesses of this defense?
Play action passing, my life depended on it. I would run at least 2, maybe even 3 double pass situations, whether it's a flea flicker, whether it's, a backwards pass to a wide receiver, played quarterback in college, all that type of stuff. As much eye candy as you can do, motion, different formations. Do not let them look at a still picture. If any team that has played K-State, if they run a play that they aren't running at least one guy in motion, that's just a failure. They between the communication and the over aggression, that's what you need to do. If you are making K-State's defense look instead of think pre-snap, you're setting yourself up for success.
Interesting. I meant to ask the same question regarding your offense as well. If you're a defensive coordinator, how are you attacking this Kansas State offense?
Yeah, I think that it would be, force Avery Johnson to make contested throws under pressure. So if you can go man on man, and if you trust your guys, bring pressure and keep contain it, and then try to force him to throw into tight windows. Because again, I think he's a better passer than our rival fans want to say. They're like, oh, he's just a running back with a decent arm. No, he's a little bit better than that, but he's not going to put it into a keyhole window. He's not going to have a perfect deep ball. For every 3 or 4 deep balls he throws, he might connect on one of them. But again, he's still getting his sea legs under him. But that's how I would attack the offense. Pressure, contain, and try to force him into those windows, and then just tackle when you get a shot in the running game.
I want to transition to special teams. You guys have a pretty good kicker in Chris Tennant. But one thing that really stuck out to me on your podcast is you mentioned you guys have had issues with snaps all season. What is the primary issue? Is it bad snaps? Is it the holder not being able to catch them properly? What would you primarily attribute that to? Because Rutgers is known for a couple things under Greg Schiano, and one is blocking kicks and punts in the special teams game. So that immediately perked my ears up.
You'll get a shot on field goals. 100% you'll get a shot on an extra point or field goal. The snaps have been horrible. There are a few of them because I think there were 7 or 8 field goals that either didn't get off or were blocked because of snap hold connection.
Wow.
The snaps have been horrible all year. There was especially in that Houston game, Simon McClannon, the punter, could have gotten them down but didn't. He has made some pretty good holds, but after, I can't even remember which game it was. Maybe the Arizona State game. So the final 2 or 3 games, the snap would just go back there incredibly slow. And that's what got the field goal blocked versus Iowa State. So the holder has not been great. I'd give Simon McClannon a C- as a holder, and they've rotated 2 guys at long snapper. I give both of them Fs. It has been disgusting. And again, I long snapped in high school, and I'm not about to say anyone can do it because they can't. It is the average generic football fan watching that. Oh, anyone should be able to do that. No, that is not true. Yeah. It is a lot tougher than folks realize. But a Power-Four football program, especially one that came into this season with conference championship aspirations, you need to have 2 guys that you can depend on, and you had 0. And you had 2 guys that were absolute failures at that spot. So you guys will have a shot to get a blocked field goal, 100%. If you don't get it, it's on you.
Well, good to hear there. We've covered a lot. Is there anything that either I haven't touched on that you think is important to factor into this game, or is there any questions you had for me about Rutgers heading into this game that you wanted to have answered?
Well, I'll ask you this. If you were going to say, hey, I have one key for Rutgers to get this win, what is the number one thing that you, Mike, are dialing in on?
I want to set the caveat as I think the number one thing would be who's playing, because there's a huge senior contingency on this roster who have not really stated whether or not they're going to play. The main key I would have is just continuing the offensive growth we saw over the last 4 games. We became a much more pass-oriented team, which opened up lanes in the running game, and continuing that ascension of the passing game through our young receivers and through Ethan Kaliak-Manis, the transfer quarterback, I think will be crucial, because you've laid out basically a case for attacking the secondary deep. You have Parrish, who's not going to be at this game, not going to play in this game. Cody McAllister's starting safety, who you said had communication issues in the starting group. I can only imagine there's issues in the backups as well.
Yeah, because Colby McAllister, that's something I didn't mention. He is out injured. He will not be playing in this game. So you will be, playing Jordan Riley, who's been the biggest transfer fail that we've had in the Chris Klieman era, because he's brought in some great safeties and great defensive backs through the portal. Biggest failure in the portal in the Klieman era. And I feel okay saying that because these kids are getting paid. They're not even kids. He's 23. They're getting paid. Exactly. I feel okay being critical of them now.
Defensively, I would say we were in the month of October just an abject failure. We couldn't stop a high-powered high school offense. Our linebackers weren't filling gaps well. They couldn't cover anything across the middle of the field. If you watch the UCLA or the USC tape or the Wisconsin tape, you'd be shocked that Rutgers won a game the rest of the season, given how we played on defense. Over the November bye, they basically broke the team down defensively to the studs, they said, and built the team back up. They built the scheme back up, and they played their best defense of the year over those last 4 games. Now, that's great, but the defensive coordinator, Joe Harris-Simiak, left to take the head coaching job at UMass, and Schiano kind of jokingly said, I was cursing Joe a bit because he used to do all this stuff for us. And I think the defense is not Greg Schiano is a great defensive coach. He used to be the DC at Rutgers. He was, hired to be the DC under Belichick for New England. He was the DC under Urban Meyer at Ohio State. So he knows what he's doing. But I think when you have to kind of downshift mid-season to, take another role, there's always some risk there. So I would say if the defense isn't on the same path that they've coursed for the last 4 games, that's the thing to look out for, because our linebackers are getting abused. And if you guys have several high-end tight ends who you can utilize in the pass game, that to me screams danger. So if you guys are able to carve us up over the middle, these, stop routes or these, slants with tight ends, we're just not going to be able to stop that in all likelihood. But I think the biggest thing will be containing your quarterback, Avery Johnson. If he's just able to kind of slither away from our, hit here and there pass rush and just able to pick up an easy 6-7 yards and, scoot out of bounds, because it doesn't seem like he's the kind of guy who will try and get those extra 2 yards from what you said. Just he's able to just get kind of yards based on athleticism. I think that's probably the biggest issue for me is just containing him. If he breaks contain, that's where we're going to lose the game primarily, in my opinion.
Well, selfishly, I hope that's the way it goes.
I mean, it's been that way for most of the season, so it would not surprise me. But speaking of, how this game is going to go, prediction wise, I want to hear what you think is going to play out in this one, because when this game opened with Kansas State being a 9.5-point favorite, I just ran to my sports book, or I opened my sports book as quick as possible and placed a spread bet and a money line bet for Rutgers, because I just knew that spread was not going to hold, especially given that, I didn't think DJ Giddens would play in this game, given his, high draft pick. Or not, maybe not high draft pick, but he was probably going to be a second day pick or early third day pick. And Schiano has always gotten his guys to treat, it could be the, piss in the street with homeless people bowl, and he would have those guys acting like it was the damn Super Bowl. So I knew that, like, given that you guys had a down season, given that Schiano always has his guys up to play, given the senior leadership on this group, and I think they're all going to play, by the way. If I had to guess, I think, all these guys who came in together and wanted to go out together, who didn't answer calls when they were getting them in the transfer portal, could have gotten paid a lot more money. I know Kyle Monungai had an offer from an SEC program for $800,000 to go be a running back elsewhere that he didn't take, and he stayed loyal. So I think that Schiano's going to have his guys ready to go. And the main thing I think is going to be motivation for this game. Is Kansas State excited and up for this game? You said that you don't even think and obviously you're not on the coaching staff, but you said you'd be surprised if they'd started game planning already. I think Schiano's been in the lab.
I think game install is happening on Friday the 20th. So, a few bowl practices that have been K-State versus K-State development practices. But no, they've not spent the entire bowl prep getting ready for this. And I'll tell you this right now, if someone were to come and tell me, hey, Schiano has game planned every single one of his practices for this game, I'd probably have a different prediction. I would imagine every program is doing a lot of developmental stuff early.
Yep, I think you're 100% right there. I might have gotten a little out in front of my skis. But how do you think this game will ultimately play out? What's your prediction for the game score-wise and just how it plays? I'm a fan. I think I haven't picked against K-State. I'm not going to. I would like to think we could cover that number, but again, not having DJ, not having Jacob Parrish does give me some pause. K-State, this is the 5th time we've been in the Copper Bowl. That was the original name for it. It's had 5 different names every time we play in it, but I call it the Copper Bowl. 3-1 in those games. So I'm going to keep the good vibes going. Chris Klieman has been he's trying to get to over 500 in bowl games. So he's currently 2-2. Again, we don't talk about the COVID season. Like, what even happened there? I don't even know what's going on. His losses to Alabama and Navy. He's beat LSU and NC State. So I'll if I had to throw like a score prediction, I would say K-State 34 with a blocked extra point, and we'll say Rutgers 26. They have 24, but they took that blocked extra point back for 2. So get a weird score out there. So 34-26. So I guess I wouldn't. Oh yeah, that would be 8 points. Sure. So there we go. I'll take K-State to cover, but I'm not convicted in that. You could tell me Rutgers wins by 30. I wouldn't be surprised. You could tell me K-State wins by 30. I wouldn't be surprised. You could tell me it's a 17 overtime game going back and forth in a 2-point shootout. Game kicks off 4:30 Central, 5:30 Eastern, and it ends on the 27th. Nothing would surprise me with this. But I'm just looking forward to getting to watch K-State football play one more game this season. Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, it's hard to be a podcaster and not still be an active fan, just to have that kind of passion. So I rarely pick against Rutgers unless it's, Ohio State coming to town or Penn State, whatever. I think this will be a good game, first and foremost. I think both teams will put up a lot of yardage, put up a lot of points. I think Rutgers ends up winning. Greg Schiano has only lost one non-conference game since he's come back, and that was a ranked Wake Forest team on 6 days' notice going to the Gator Bowl in 2021 when we were 5-7, and Texas A&M backed out at the last minute because of COVID. So that's the only game that he's lost in the out of conference since then. He's got a really good historical record in bowl games and as an underdog. I think he just finds a way to get his guys motivated enough to pull this game off. I think it'll be high scoring. I'm going to go 31-27 in a game that it's kind of like whoever has the ball last is going to win. And Rutgers, I think, finds a way to win. But either, like you said, I could see this going in a lot of different directions. But that's just kind of how I see it going. I really want to say thank you for coming on and giving us an hour of your time here. Where can our fans find your work and on social media?
Yeah, we're just about everywhere. You can find podcasts. You mentioned we've been doing some of the year in review type stuff. We go from July to the end of December, 5 shows a week, including holidays. So we'll have a Christmas Eve episode and a Christmas Day episode leading into the bowl game. I love doing this. It's fun. My original dream was to be a sports talk show host. Then I, for some reason, thought that those guys weren't fans. They were unbiased people talking about sports. That is the dumbest thing in the world, especially since I got to know some of these folks since doing a podcast. They're just as big of fans as us, but it's my creative outlet. I love doing it. Anywhere you find a podcast, any obscure app, Boscoe's Boys is there, at Boscoe's Boys on Twitter, at Scott Wildcats, my personal Twitter accounts. And I would just like to, tell all of your listeners, I've been saying this on a few of my episodes, as we're getting here to the, festive period, holiday period. First and foremost, if you have the time or the financial ability, please make a donation to a cause near and dear to your heart, or spend some time, volunteering as we get into this festive period and go into the new year. If you are someone who loves the holiday season, make sure you check up on folks. Not everyone actually loves this time of the year. So if you're someone who does, check up on someone who may not, where this might be a tougher time of the year. And if you're having a tough time, reach out to someone, talk to your friends, talk to me. You can talk to a complete rando stranger who lives in Kansas if you want, at Scott Wildcat, always here for you all times of the year, but especially here at Christmas, just because I love this season. I know you may not. So anyone out there, please reach out. If you love this time of year, reach out to your friends. And then again, if you have the ability, make a donation to a charitable cause that you enjoy, or volunteer some of your time here at this festive season as we go into the new year, 2025. So thanks for letting me get on that soapbox, Mike.
Oh, no problem. That's a great message for this time of year because, like you said, not everybody's in the same situation that you are. So it is always, this is like you said, this is a tragic time of year for some people, and it would, probably mean a lot to even have the slightest bit of a human interaction for some at the time. But thank you for joining us once again. For my ghost co-host, Richie, who's normally here, for me and him and Alec and Scott, this has been another edition of the Night Report podcast, signing off.